Cecil McCarthy. I'm the director of the journalism program here at Hunter College. And I'd definitely like to welcome all of you on behalf of the Foreign Correspondents Association here in the U.S. I'd especially like to welcome the AFC board members who are here and President Thanos Dimittis, Chairwoman Nancy Prager Kimmel, Vice President and Deputy Vice President Suzanne Adams, and Clarissa McNair, and all our members in the audience. A warm welcome as well to our special guest, former Secretary of the Homeland Security, Jeh Johnson, the President of the United Nations Association, Valeria Robecco, the Honorary Executive Advisor of the AFC-USA, Suzanne Adams, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. She's not feeling well. Senior Director of the Business Programming at CNN, Penny Manis. Bear's Senior Vice President and Head of Corporate Affairs, Raymond Karens. Daniel Klaidman, the editor-in-chief of Yahoo News, and other esteemed guests, including our Hunter College journalism students who are getting extra credit for coming tonight. So tonight is really an opportunity to celebrate the important work that foreign correspondents and journalists, in fact, are doing all over the world. When Thanos and I discussed possible themes for this evening, I had just read A.G. Sulzberger's speech to Brown University students that was reprinted as an op-ed in the New York Times on September 23rd. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. And it's called The Growing Threat of Journalism Around the World. To journalism around the world. And it describes in stark terms the ongoing global assault against journalism and the core democratic values that the free press safeguards. What's most disturbing, Sulzberger writes, is that the seeds of the campaign against journalists were planted right here in a country that has long prided itself on being the fiercest defender of free expression and a free press. Sulzberger argues that the crackdown on journalists around the world is being tacitly encouraged by a president who regularly attacks the U.S. press corps. And to prove his point, he actually recounts a story that was never publicly shared before about a call the New York Times received 2 years ago. That call was a heads up from a government official about an imminent arrest of one of their reporters named Declan Walsh, who was based in Egypt. Sulzberger says calls like this are actually fairly standard and that the State Department often plays a role in protecting U.S. journalists abroad and in securing their release if they're ever detained. But this time it was different. The official passing along the intel was doing so without the knowledge or the permission of the Trump administration and at considerable risk to their career because they believed the administration was going to allow the arrest to take place without warning. So the New York Times knew at this point it could not count on the U.S. government to help or protect one of its journalists working abroad. And let that sink in. They could not count on the U.S. government to help them with one of their journalists. So instead, they reached out to Ireland, the reporter's native country, for help. And within the hour, Irish diplomats arrived at Declan's home and whisked him out of the country before the arrest could take place. But he was one of the lucky ones. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, in 2018, 56 journalists were killed, 250 jailed, and 65 went missing, making it one of the most dangerous years ever to be a journalist. We also remember tonight the 19 who have been killed already, many of them in Mexico, which is now the most deadly country in the world to be a journalist. Perhaps even more insidious, though, is the constant berating from a president who repeatedly calls the press the enemy of the people. In fact, he's tweeted that phrase 36 times, to be exact, according to the Twitter presidency article that was in the Sunday Times yesterday. That same article also noted 1,308 tweets attacking news organizations by name. The president also tweets about fake news whenever he does not like the press coverage or wants to delegitimize factual stories. Sulzberger writes, in attacking the American media, President Trump has done more than undermine his own citizens' faith in the news organizations attempting to hold him accountable. He has effectively given foreign leaders permission to do the same with their country's journalists, and even given them a vocabulary with which to do it. He goes on to point out that more than 50 prime ministers, presidents, and leaders of countries across 5 continents now use that term, fake news, to justify anti-press measures. Which makes evenings like this even more important, because foreign journalists, like so many of you here tonight, are on the front lines trying to hold people accountable, people in power accountable, and we salute you and thank you. And to all the companies here who are supporting their work through scholarships, and the board members who give their time so generously, and really to everyone in the audience who pays for a subscription to a news outlet so that they can pursue their original reporting, we salute you too. And I am truly honored to be here tonight to recognize the fine work of the AFC-USA. So let's get started. Thanks. So I'd like to welcome now Nancy Prager Kimmel, the Chairwoman of Scholarships and Educational Programs for the AFC-USA.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to welcome you all. It's a nice full crowd. It's with great pride and pleasure that we welcome our distinguished guests to our inaugural presentation of the annual awards and scholarships. Our vision as the Association of Foreign Correspondents USA is to enhance the skills of young journalists, as well as to expand the access and knowledge of events and issues for practicing correspondents throughout the United States. We are proud to offer high-level conversations and panels with worldwide influential voices. James Madison wrote a resolution that was adopted by the Virginia Assembly in January 1800. He stated that his interpretation of the First Amendment guarantees freedom of the press, which would become the established position of our Supreme Court. Never has this been more challenged, our press more vulnerable than in the current times. Never has the Fourth Estate been so relevant. Journalists have become an endangered species, with safety, respect, support reaching a tipping point. Freedom of the press and its ability to hold the powerful accountable is more challenged than ever, while news medias as a whole suffer from loss of independence and growth in the public mistrust. There is throughout the world more government censorship, more corporate control, increasingly more dissemination of misinformation, and more violence against journalists. The moment we no longer have a free press, anything can happen. Who we, the Association of Foreign Correspondents in the U.S., are, and how well we value and prepare the future generation of journalists is our paramount commitment. Our mission is simply stated. Through education, experience, mentoring, we are dedicated to facilitate and accelerate support for a free and informed press with the goal of putting education at the epicenter of journalism. Tonight, in this historic dwelling, we bestow our first annual scholarship awards to a distinguished group of journalists who have returned to U.S. universities seeking to hone, expand, and enhance their communication skills. This evening, we assemble and pay respect to those chosen as excelling in their professional and academic performance. We honor a diverse representation from India, Russia, Kenya, South Africa, and Bulgaria, representing a vast array of journalism schools such as USC, Berkeley, NYU, CUNY, Indiana University, University of Oklahoma, Columbia, Missouri, Stanford, Wisconsin, Northwestern, and the New School. No one yet from Hunter, I might add. Our 5 winners have excelled in their responses with the weighted value given to their work as well in graduate school as well as prior experience in publication. All applicants were asked to address the following issue. Quote, "There are several ways that political powers attempt to silence journalists and curtail freedom of information. Give an example from your country of origin in which you or your colleagues were confronted by political powers or other organized interests with the intent of silencing you or them. Describe how you perceive your role as a correspondent regarding these situations and, in general, the role of journalism as a cornerstone of democracy in your country of origin. Our first year has been an auspicious one as we link with other well-respected and notable organizations, each individually and collectively representing the voice and the needs of the working correspondents in the United States. We also wish to thank, especially tonight, our generous sponsors, Bayer, P&G, Microsoft, CBS News, and NASDAQ, and our notable speakers and presenters. We also want to thank the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute at Hunter College for hosting us, and the dedicated time and effort of our Scholarship Board of Directors, who spent their time and a lot of energy going through a very vast and a very complex group of applications. They are committed to the excellence that is so well represented here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. I'd now like to introduce Raymond Karens, a Senior Vice President and Head of Corporate Affairs at Bayer, which has been a stalwart supporter of the AFC-USA Scholarship Program for foreign journalists.
Well, guys, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, how fitting is it that here we are in the Roosevelt House? As you know, freedom of the press was one of Roosevelt's 4 freedoms that he focused on heavily. So if you all don't mind, I have some very minor remarks, but I just want to throw it up here. Okay. First of all, it's an honor to be here. This evening represents a great institution that has been born of the idea of celebrating journalism and ensure that journalists are protected around the world. We at Bayer, a global company, are proud to sponsor the Association of Foreign Correspondents of America and fully embrace the organization's mission to provide opportunity here in the United States for journalists from outside who are looking to learn and advance their craft. This is something quite true, and truth must prevail at all cost. Freedom of the press is something that we honor here tonight. And in my case, I want to offer up in Bayer's commitment to freedom of the press, and the independence and the safety of journalists all around the world. It is key. Freedom of the press is one of the most important hallmarks of our democracy. It is a concept rooted in the very First Amendment of our own Constitution, and it must be protected at all cost. We know that without freedom of the press, there is no freedom whatsoever. Any threat to freedom of the press or the safety of our journalists anywhere in the world is a threat to the existence of our own democracy here in this great country of the United States of America. On a more personal note, I want to thank Thanos and Nancy because of all that they have done, and the entire board for the unwavering support of our journalists. Journalism and freedom of the press must prevail. We are proud to be a sponsor and associated with your organization. And I want to say God bless you all for all that you do every day to ensure that the truth prevails. Thank you very much. We're doing some awards now? Okay, now. So, I sat down with both of our recipients and I asked them a very important question. You would think is, how do you feel as winner? And I said, no. How do you pronounce your last name? Right? We did this, right? So Natalia said to me, we went over 4 or 5 times, but just please come up right now, because I'm going to mess this up. We're going to do this together. Come on. Where's Priyanka? Come on, ladies, please come on up here. Give them a round of applause. Come closer. Okay. Now, ready? I'm going to try it now. Ready?
Sure.
Okay. Which one are you? Ready? Kunishevich. Right?
Yes, thank you.
That was pretty good.
Amazing.
Come on closer. Come on closer. Ladies and gentlemen, these are 2 fine examples of professionals who have gone out of their way to ensure that the truth shall prevail. And on behalf of both my organization, may I have one at a time, please? We want to present you with these beautiful awards, well deserving. That is yours, please. Hold on to that one.
Thank you.
And then we're going to get from behind this podium because the podium's getting in the way.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah, come on down here. We're so proud of you and all that you've accomplished.
Congratulations to Priyanka and Natalia, who will both say a few words after they get their picture taken.
Who goes first?
Thank you so much, Raymond Karens, Bayer, and the board of the Association of Foreign Correspondents, and everyone who made this scholarship possible. As I was listening to Cecile, I could not stop myself from recalling an afternoon in the June of 2011, when a colleague of mine was shot dead in broad daylight in Mumbai, where I worked. 8 years later, the newsroom where we worked, all of us, all the reporters, still continue reporting. None of them dropped out of journalism. All of them are exposing human rights violations, exposing corruption, and telling stories that need to be told. Because I think journalists are a resilient breed, I would like to share a story that I reported for a publication when I was working in India. I traveled to a very remote district where over 100 children had died because of a mysterious illness. The region also had an active insurgency problem. My stories from the region exposed the government's lacuna. Most of the children who died suffered from malnutrition. Many of them were infected with mosquito-borne illnesses. So it wasn't a mysterious illness, it was a cover-up. The stories that I produced were possible because of the publication I worked for. And the publication had the resources and the reach. And it was not chasing crazy traffic goals. But this year, in June, 16 of my colleagues were laid off. They were excellent reporters, very talented, my close friends. And I could have been one of them. The reason cited was that economics were not in their favor. And this is exactly what is frustrating. This is what frustrates me. As I stand here in front of all of you, I urge each one of you to think about ways in which we can make journalism more sustainable. Because I cannot report effectively and efficiently without the backing of a publication which has the reach to reach millions of people, to reach the masses. Thank you all for organizing this event, and thank you to the association and everyone present here. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. It is a great pleasure for me to receive this award and this scholarship, and it's particularly special to me since this is the first award I've won in the United States, and I hope it's not the last one. Bayer, thank you so much for this award, Mr. Karens. It's a great pleasure, and it's so important that Bayer, as one of the largest international companies, supports foreign journalists. I would also like to thank the Association of Foreign Correspondents, especially Nancy, Thanos. Thank you so much for being so gracious to me. The association and events like this are extremely important, especially when it comes to topics such as the growing threat to journalism around the world. And I think there are no better storytellers than foreign journalists. As a Russian correspondent, as a Russian journalist, I could say that the biggest threat is, of course, the censorship of media. For example, if you watch TV in Russia, you may see two different realities. State-owned channels will show you a rosy picture of a wealthy country which actually benefited from the US and European sanctions. However, we do have independent newsroom, which will tell you that the poverty is at the highest level in 10 years. Local businesses are suffering from the sanctions, and the largest contribution to the GDP growth is government spending on infrastructure projects such as Olympic Games to Sochi or bridge to Crimea, which, by the way, were built by the business loyal to the Kremlin. So I had an opportunity and chance to work as an anchor at this independent largest newsroom, Russian business TV channel, which gave me an opportunity to do breaking news stories, conduct exclusive interviews, and even investigative reporting. As a foreign correspondent in the US, it is crucial for me to learn how the largest media companies report the news in this country. And this spring, I had an opportunity to learn from the CNN business team through my internship at the Questman's Business TV show. I would like to thank one of my former supervisors, Penny Manis, who is also here. Thanks to your team, I've learned what quick means in journalism. And it's great that your team can report on the biggest news stories and always have fun. And finally, I wouldn't be on this stage without Professor Solomon, who is a director of Business and Economic Reporting Program. Thank you so much, Professor Solomon, for giving me this chance, despite I was late for our first meeting because of the terrorist threat at the Times Square. But welcome to New York. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Priyanka and Natalia, and congratulations once again. For our next scholarship, I'd like to introduce Cameron Bass, who will be presenting 2 scholarships on behalf of Microsoft.
Please clap. Thank you. I'm honored to be here tonight on behalf of Microsoft. We are proud to support the work of the Association of Foreign Correspondents of the United States, and we thank the association and its board members for their commitment to support international journalists. Microsoft's mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. As part of that, we have a goal to help journalists live our shared value, the pursuit of truth so that people and communities can make the best decisions to improve their daily lives. We believe in the importance of a free, trustworthy, and empowered press. This is more important now than ever. In addition to supporting the scholarships we are awarding tonight, we've partnered with newsrooms around the world to help empower them with the tools and technology to bring their stories to life and to the public in unprecedented ways, all the while running successful, sustainable businesses. We know we can't solve the broader challenges facing journalism alone, but we continue to reflect on the value of a free press, the sacrifices that have been made globally to ensure a free press, and how we can all step up in our own ways to ensure trusted journalism continues to thrive in a digital age. That is why I'm so pleased tonight to present scholarships to Larian Kamon and Kimmel DeGraff. I'd love to welcome them up here and tell you a little bit about them before we do the exchange. Larry and Kimmel. Larry was previously the BBC Africa business editor in Kenya. He has reported from nearly 40 countries. He is a contributing columnist for the Washington Post Global Opinions, and with nearly 4 million followers on social media, he was named one of the 100 most influential Africans in 2008 by the New African magazine. And he is completing a master's degree in business and economics journalism. So congrats, Larry. Maybe 4 million and counting after tonight. And Kimon has reported from Africa for publications including the New York Times, The Guardian, and The Atlantic. A biologist by training, he has written about immigration, drug markets, and conservation conflict, as well as authoring a book on abalone poaching. He is completing a master's degree in journalism. Please join me in congratulating Larry Kamon. Congratulations.
Larian Kamon will say a few words. Congratulations.
I'm very nervous. I haven't worn a tie since high school, and so kind of, and I think I've gotten away with that because of being a freelance journalist for 7 years. So I normally work in my pajamas. Huge thank you to the Association of Foreign Correspondents. Moving to the States for postgraduate study is a dream. If you want mentorship and training in the craft of journalism, there's nowhere else in the world to go, really, or nowhere close to this. It's also prohibitively expensive, and we are not able to be here without support from organizations such as yours and the organizations that support them. So a very big thank you to Microsoft, and specifically Peter de Brouw. Did I say that right? Yes. Peter de Brouw from Global Communications. As a beneficiary of Microsoft's investment in journalism, I'm grateful and humbled, and also to be here with such fantastic colleagues tonight. So I'm from South Africa. We're normally held up as a country as a beacon of the free press. The freedom of the press is enshrined in our constitution. Our journalists are not really arrested or killed or prohibited from doing their work in the overt ways that so many other reporters around the world are. And yet, it's kind of in keeping with a bit of a depressing global picture. The journalistic imagination of my country has steadily been constrained. One way it's constrained is by the way in which our governments and companies have taken up the message of fake news. Our Twitter discourse is a mess. I can't imagine having 4 million followers and having all that noise and toxic kind of discrediting of reporting surrounding me all the time. So we're seeing confidence in the press being eroded, much like elsewhere, including right here. And but something maybe more specific to the kind of work that I've done is the kind of hollowing out of journalistic institutions and the broken business model of journalism. So I've been fortunate to work for a few international publications, and yet I see so many brilliant journalists in South Africa working for local news media who can't afford to put them on a story for more than a day or half a day or sometimes 3. And so I see so many brilliant stories with a local audience that wants to read them, and there's no mechanism for really connecting them. And then we have to wait for foreign journalists to come in and tell our stories better than we can in some respects, but also not nearly as well as we can in other respects. And I'm ecstatic to see reporters from developing nations here with me, because I hope that this can change, and I'm not sure how to change that, but I was actually going to start by saying that, like, one way I've continued being a journalist to kind of stick my head in the sand and not thinking about how hard it is and how structurally constrained our work is. And so big ups to all of you people for keeping doing this. I think sometimes you just got to put your blinkers on and push on and do the next story and the next one and the next one after that. So huge thank you for the support. Foreign Correspondents Association and Microsoft, I'm really grateful.
I used to live in South Africa, so I couldn't agree more. Congratulations to Kimmel and the other awardees tonight. Let me tell you a fun story. Thank you so much to the Association of Foreign Correspondents in the USA and to Microsoft for this. I knew New York was expensive, but then I came here, and whatever I imagined, it's even more expensive than that. So I really appreciate this. A fun story. So 2 years ago, I had to evade arrest by my own government and end up in a safe house. And how we did that is we crouched under a car that came out of the basement and basically at the very bottom of the belly of the car, and kind of somehow made it out of the newsroom where I used to work. It's very dramatic in the movies, but in real life it's just really smelly. So please vacuum your cars. The reason why that was is because 2 years ago the Kenyan government suddenly shut down 3 of the biggest independent TV stations for national security reasons. Focus on air quotes. And the national security reason is because the leader of the opposition after the election decided that he was going to swear himself in a parallel swearing in. And the government said we could not cover that because it would inflame passions or whatever. And so I was an anchor and editor to one of the stations, NTV, and I was on the air when our signal was taken off the air. And I became one of the most critical opponents of this attempt to muzzle us and to basically harm our freedom. And I was very publicly disagreeing with the government locally on my social media, but also in lots of international outlets. And so one of my colleagues and I, as well as our boss, was earmarked for arrest by this very brutal wing of the Kenya police that's known for enforced disappearances. So we could have gotten arrested and disappeared forever. And that's why they were camped outside our newsroom, and if we went out, then we were going to get nabbed, and that's why we had to go into the safe house. And eventually we got something called anticipatory bail, and which essentially blocks the government from arresting you, and if they prefer charges against you, then you say, I'm a law-abiding citizen, I'll show up in court to answer any charges. And that's how we became free. But when I went back to work, my organization, I used to write a column for a newspaper also owned by the organization, and I tried to write about that experience, and I was told, actually, we can't publish that. And I was also told that we're going to keep you off the air for a little bit, just until things cool down, and you can't interview these people when you come back. So not only was I a target of arrest by the government, but then the organization was self-censoring to try and not displease the government. And obviously, it was a situation that was unacceptable for me. I ended up publishing the same column with CNN.com, thanks to them. And I left the organization. I went to work for the BBC, got a great job, thankfully, working, covering business news in Africa, splitting my time between Nairobi and London. Let's be honest, I sold out. But the air miles were nice. And this year, I took a sabbatical from that job and came to Colombia. But one of the things I've seen over the last decade or so traveling across Africa is met so many of my colleagues, local journalists that work for blogs and small publications and government-owned outlets all across the continent, in Cameroon, in Rwanda, in Ethiopia, in Mali, and they're getting arrested. Their stuff is getting banned. The newspapers are getting taken off the streets. In some cases, they're getting arrested, and they disappear in Tanzania, for instance, and sometimes they don't appear again. In some cases, in some extreme cases, journalists are ending up dead in Somalia, for instance. And that's a major crisis that we have on the continent. It's a major attack on press freedom. And they don't have the protections that the BBC offers, for instance. They don't have the prestige of Columbia. They don't have the privilege of recognition of an association like the Association of Foreign Correspondents. They do their work exposing wrongdoing and shining a spotlight on malfeasance and corruption, and they're speaking truth to power in ways that I could never imagine. They are the true heroes, and they are the ones that deserve all the recognition. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. We're going to invite Nancy Prager Kimmel back to give the next scholarship.
Thank you. Just in case anybody was interested, I want to say that all of these recipients came in equally. There was not any weight about it. The scholarships are equal, and the way they stood out from all of the applications is equal. So last but not least, and certainly I did not have the chance or the brilliance of Ray to ask how to pronounce the last name, so I'm going to try to do it as best I can. Tonight we congratulate Peter Georgiev. Am I right? Yes. Okay, thank you. From Bulgaria, who is studying at the University of Missouri. This scholarship is sponsored by P&G. Peter's a journalist in broadcast, print, and online media. He's traveled to over 20 countries, He was a correspondent for the Bulgarian National Television, and he hosted the weekly news magazine program called #Europe. Presently, he's a research assistant at the, quote, investigative reporters and editors, end quote. Peter is completing his master's degree in data and investigative journalism at University of Missouri, and we welcome him and congratulate him. Job well done. You get the award and the money? Here you go. There you go. You're very well. Very well done job.
I realize I'm the only one not from New York currently. It was a long trip from Missouri. So thank you to the association, of course, and thank you to all the companies for supporting my work, but more importantly for inspiring journalists all across the world to improve the state of our society through their coverage of important issues. Also, thank you to the University of Missouri, of course, for admitting me to one of the best journalism programs, and thus allowing me to learn from incredibly talented students and professionals every day. So tonight we have discussed in great depth the dangers of being a journalist in the 21st century. And in my country, Bulgaria, journalists have been forced to work in an extremely difficult environment. Of course, this is the case in other countries, as we've seen tonight. They've been forced to cope with aggression, with censorship, and with a lack of money, and with personal attacks as well, and on a daily basis. And thus, I'd like to say that they have managed to produce an incredible amount of investigative journalism despite all that. They have managed to hold institutions accountable, to expose crime and corruption, and to reinforce our belief in journalism as an institution. And so despite all the difficulties and all the challenges that we face right now, I am proud to be part of this generation of news professionals, and I choose to be optimistic about the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter, and congratulations. Well, I'm incredibly impressed with, take the trophy. I'm incredibly impressed with our scholarship recipients, and if this group is any indication of what the next generation is, I think we're going to be in good shape. So congratulations to all of you again. I'm honored now to introduce Suzanne Adams, currently a diplomatic correspondent at the United Nations. She has reported from some of the world's hotspots, including Egypt, Lebanon, Haiti, Iran, Iraq. She's also covered stories across the U.S. from Detroit to Louisiana, California, and Wisconsin, and her work has been featured in Newsweek, The Daily Journalist, Al Jazeera, Press TV, and Euronews, among many others. Please join me in welcoming Susan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces, and I also want to welcome my classmates at Columbia University Graduate School. First of all, Larry, congratulations to you, and we have two of my fellow classmates who came to support me. Hi. Okay, so we are here to give awards to some of the people that are very near and dear to us. For over 2 decades, Ms. Suzanne Adams has been supporting foreign correspondents here in the United States. She spearheaded a program and founded FPA Scholarship Fund and has maintained leadership roles in organizing and supporting journalists from all walks of life. So far, she has granted scholarships to over 80 foreign correspondents and students enrolled at graduate schools here in the United States. We are so fortunate to have Ms. Suzanne Adams serve as the Honorary Executive Advisor to the Board of the Association of Foreign Correspondents in the United States. As many of you know, we founded the AFC United States with the mandate of supporting foreign correspondents during their time here with us and hopefully maintaining long-term relationship and friendships when they leave. Suzanne Adams has played an influential role all throughout this process. She has been gracious with her time, experience, and support, and we are forever grateful to have her on our board. It is my pleasure as Vice President of the Association of Foreign Correspondents to award Ms. Suzanne Adams the Honorary Advisor to AFC-USA. This award, where's the award and where's Ms. Adams? Here's the award. Ms. Adams couldn't be with us today. She was a little ill, so would you like to say something about Suzanne?
I'm not going to receive the award on behalf of Suzanne Adams, but what I want to say is that we're very grateful for having Suzanne Adams as the Executive Advisor to our boards. For those of you who don't know who Suzanne Adams is the woman who gave the soul and half of her life in supporting foreign correspondents like us. Ray Karens, Green Slaughter know her better than us. But when we decided to go ahead and to establish a new organization, the Association of Foreign Correspondents, Suzanne Adams was standing by our vision. She supported us, she gave us her own guidance. And unfortunately, she's sick because she's old, although she told me not to reveal her age. But we wish her to complete 100 years of life and more, and to stay strong and to stay next to us, stand by us, and in the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years. We will deliver this award to Suzanne Adams to her home, and she is very sorry that she was not able to attend this event tonight. But I want to have her applause.
For our next award, I'd like to introduce Penny Manis, the Senior Director of Business Programming at CNN International, my alma mater. In fact, she and I and Alan Dodge Frank were just reminiscing about working for Lou Dobbs back in the day. Penny oversees the network's business shows, including Quest Means Business, First Move with Julia Chatterley, and The Express. She also leads the multi-platform editorial teams in New York, London, Hong Kong, Abu Dhabi, and South Africa. You get around. Please join me in welcoming Penny Manis.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to appear this evening to talk about the growing threat to journalism around the world. In my 25 years of working at CNN, by the way, don't do that math, I'm really young, the security of our staff has been always a top priority. It's literally a topic at the center of everything we do, from covering protests to running to an island devastated by a hurricane, to reporting live out of combat zones. Careful measures are always considered, and the support of governments is sometimes what has gotten us through very sticky situations. I've been privileged to be on the front line of covering breaking news stories for CNN. At times, I have also found myself in difficult situations, covering protests in places like Venezuela and Greece, utilizing riot gear and relying on our security personnel. As a manager of our international desk and a senior producer on AC360, I've also deployed teams to difficult situations. We certainly have multiple procedures in place to try to manage risk. It's as important as ever now that there is so much political volatility around the world. Today, as we speak, there are protests in Latin America, in the Middle East, in Asia, Hong Kong, that we cover very, very carefully. CNN only sends journalists to challenging field assignments who have been to a training course designed to give us tools. We also have a strict procedure in which reporting teams lay out a plan for coverage that we assess with our security consultants, and they're all from backgrounds as varied as MI6 and beyond. But only top executives greenlight assignments and reporting plans. It's a very delicate balance of risk versus reward each and every time. Sometimes, though, things don't go according to plan. During regular reporting out of Iraq, our senior international correspondent, Arwa Damon, and her photographer, Brees, accompanied the Iraqi military into Mosul from a command base. The team was ambushed, and they found themselves trapped with a family in a building surrounded by ISIS. Arwa immediately called us on the international desk in Atlanta. Our desk managers informed military authorities of the situation so that we can craft an exit plan. We set up a system to keep an information line open and get regular updates from Arwa, even as we looked at various rescue options with the help of the military. Communications were complicated by something as simple as that Arwa's battery was going low. She could only text. Obviously, CNN didn't ask her to broadcast at all this period. There was a complete blackout. If ISIS knew there was an American journalist inside the house they had surrounded, she would have been a prime target. As it was, they thought they were just fighting with the Iraqi military. It was one of the most stressful 24-hour periods that passed before an Iraqi relief team, in coordination with the US military, were able to get to Arwa and Brice. So that's just an example that I wouldn't say it's completely routine, but that's why it's so important for us to have the support that we do sometimes get, that is sometimes a little bit more complicated in the days we live in. It doesn't just come down to war zone assignments that take a dark turn, though. CNN International operates in many parts of the world where press freedom is not recognized, and our efforts to cover stories are routinely challenged by local authorities who feel as empowered as ever to go against journalists. Unfortunately, in the last few years, our work stateside is now an issue. Many of you will recall that this time last year, a pipe bomb was intercepted by authorities at CNN in New York, and it triggered an entire employee evacuation, a building evacuation. Just a week later, another suspicious package addressed to our Atlanta offices was intercepted. Covering political rallies in the US now requires the same type of strategic planning once reserved for overseas deployments. In an election year, the security threat inside the US to CNN staff is real. In an era where the term fake news is prevalent, how do you convince people what is real journalism versus propaganda, particularly with a plethora of information or misinformation going to very segmented groups? It's as important as ever to shine a light on safety as journalists around the world fight to do our jobs. It is now my honor to introduce Valeria Robecco, President of the United Nations Correspondent Association. Please come to the stage. Valeria receives an honorary award tonight on behalf of the Association of Foreign Correspondents in the US. Please accept this award, which will be here any moment, for your contributions to foreign press reporting. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues, I'm very honored to receive this award, and I want to offer my deepest thanks to the Association of Foreign Correspondents in the United States. This award has a special meaning for me. First of all, because it comes from a group of colleagues from all over the world. And second, because it comes at a time when I have dedicated so much of my commitment as President of the UN Correspondent Association to the protection of journalists and defense of freedom of speech. We have just commemorated on November 2nd the International Day to End the Impunity of Crimes Against Journalists. And today I want to pay tribute to those members of the media who find themselves in difficult situations throughout the world. With 1,109 journalists killed in the last 12 years, according to UNESCO's 2019 report on world trends in freedom of expression and media development, and only one case out of 10 judicially solved, the level of impunity for crimes against journalists remains terribly high and constitutes one of the main factors fueling the cycle of violence against the exercise of freedom of expression. Journalists work in a climate that has deteriorated worldwide. Hostility towards members of the media across the globe is growing, and journalism can be an extremely dangerous profession. This danger takes two forms. Journalists are regularly threatened. More and more of our colleagues are being killed, and others are intimidated, harassed, arbitrarily arrested, or injured. At the same time, we are put at risk by the diffusion of fake news, which lessens public trust in our work. The expression fake news has in turn become a catchphrase for autocrats and aspiring autocrats to attack the honest work of journalists and to persecute them for it. Authoritarian regimes continue to tighten their grip on media organizations, leading to an increase in hatred and fear haunting media workers. Furthermore, journalists in democratic and free nations are also under threat. The news media landscape has changed profoundly over the past decades, and internet has turned out to be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it helps diffusion, but on the other hand, it encourages the creation of niche areas that not only disinform, but reinforce prejudices. There has been a critical increase in the reach of journalism and social media through digital sources, but at the same time, fake news is accelerating. Not to mention the manipulation of social media and their use as a weapon of mass disruption, of which ultimately authentic and transparent information becomes the victim itself. For this reason, facing the dissemination of fake news is an imperative for journalism. And it is also an opportunity to prove the importance of new and traditional media and their ability to provide verifiable information on the public interest. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, in his message for the World Press Freedom Day, said at a time when disinformation and mistrust of the media, the news media, is growing, a free press is essential for peace, justice, sustainable development, and human rights. He pointed out that no democracy is complete without access to transparent and reliable information, describing unfettered journalism as the cornerstone for building fair and impartial institutions, holding leaders accountable and speaking truth to power. Freedom of speech for press and public alike is not a gift, it is a fundamental human right that must be protected by governments. I echo the past appeals by Secretary General in calling for governments to protect journalists and to strengthen press freedom. And I am taking this opportunity to ask the United Nations once again to take a step forward in addressing the protection of journalism and journalists all over the world by appointing a special representative for the protection of journalists, a key figure that can no longer be ignored within the debate of freedom and accuracy of information. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria, and congratulations on your award. We'll now hear from the president of the AFC-USA, Thanos Dimittis, who is a foreign correspondent here from Greece and a distinguished Knight Bagehot Fellow at Columbia Journalism School. He has worked very hard to make this a special evening. He started months ago and has done everything from this room to the caterer to all the organizations. So please join me in a round of applause for Thanos.
Dear esteemed guests, Secretary Johnson, thank you all for your substantial presence here tonight. Your presence signifies something bigger than just attending a social event, because let me be clear, this is not a social event. It is a proof of what can be achieved in the course of a few months when a group of determined people, foreign correspondents who share the same vision, get together, unify their voices, deploy their energy to serve a common mission. And this is not just the mission of advancing the interests of our foreign correspondents community in the United States, but it's also to apply the theory of some of the very recognized Greek philosophers like Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, had about education. Socrates and Plato believed that education is the vehicle to attain knowledge. Aristotle conceived education as not only the attainment of knowledge, but also the attainment of happiness and goodness in life. We at the Association of Foreign Correspondents believe that the success in our profession as foreign journalists can be attained only by strengthening the exposure of us in the multiple resources that this country, the United States of America, offers to all foreigners who have the privilege of living and working in the United States. The financial aid we provide tonight to distinguished foreign journalists to pursue their master's degree in fields relevant to their reporting and to their profession is a bold step towards accomplishing our mission. But as I said, that is only a step. Our ambitions and our work do not start and do not end only with these scholarships. Today, I'm pleased to announce that starting tomorrow, I'm going to submit to our boards my recommendations for how the Association of Foreign Correspondents in 2020 will become the vehicle of also showcasing, advancing, honoring the excellence of work that is done every year by foreign journalists across the globe who work and report the news from the United States back to their own country. We are living in an historical period where it's not enough just to detect the problem and develop nice speeches describing this problem, because the problem is known to everyone almost in this room. The disruption of traditional media from the technology, from the traditional media organizations, from the technology, the difficulties that public institutions and tech giants like Facebook, Google, Twitter are facing on placing restrictions against misinformation and propaganda. The bullying and intimidation against journalists from authoritarian regimes and governments from across the globe that are synonymous to attacks against the core principles of our democracies, such as the need for free expression and the need for an informed public. And I would like to give an example and a sense of what is happening in Greece, since everyone here spoke about their own countries. In Greece, in order to be a successful journalist, you need to be aligned with the interests of the government. Everyone here spoke about the propaganda. I would say that there is another form of journalism that we need to denounce here, which is the partisan journalism. The journalism that serves the interests, not the interest of the public, to inform the public, but the interests of specific governments, political parties. In Greece, we have the examples of journalists who are running their own media organizations, news websites, and they say that they are independent, but they are not, because they are receiving advertisements from the governmental officials. And they are accountable to these governmental officials of how they diffuse the information. We have the example of journalists who are expressing public opinion in TVs, radio shows, and at the same time they are serving in the political office of a minister. We have the example of journalists who are intimidated by their own directors of news, because when they are trying to say something against the government, but because this is the truth of their reporting, they are just turned down and they don't progress their careers. These are regular daily examples that we need to face. It's not enough to talk about only fake news, misinformation, propaganda. We need, on the one hand, to support those journalists who need our support of doing their work with integrity and independence, and on the other side, to isolate the examples of those journalists who are at the same time getting money, being payrolled, getting paid by governmental executives to diffuse specific information in favor of those who are getting paid. This cannot be accepted anymore. Thank you. So, concluding my remarks, I would say that I believe that the fate of our profession is in our hands. Also, the responsibility to protect our dignity, our independence, our integrity, and our profession is in our shoulders. We cannot win this fight unless we, all journalists from different levels, local journalists, national journalists, international journalists, work together and get organized through unions and organizations that can ensure the fair and bold representation of us. That's why the only way to make our voices heard is through the existence of the organizations like the Association of Foreign Correspondents, like many other organizations like the United Nations Correspondents Association, like the Overseas Press Club, like the Committee to Protect Journalists. We need to support these organizations. We are not competitive with each other. We are standing on the same side of the history with all these organizations together. On behalf of the Association of Foreign Correspondents, I want to thank you, our supporters, for the private sector, for their generous contributions. Specifically, I want to thank you, Ray Karens, Chris Lauder from Bayer, thank you. Peter Dobro from Microsoft, who is not here today, Damon Jones from P&G, as well as the teams from CBS, NASDAQ. And this is a thank you not only for their generous contributions, Chris, Ray, Peter, and many other people who represent these corporations, but it is a thank you because their support comes with nothing in exchange. And I want to highlight this, because their contributions are unconditional. And this allows the independence and the integrity of our organization. And I want to make that clear and to be fully transparent of who are the supporters, who are the sponsors, who are the contributors to our organization. We have nothing to hide. We are more than transparent here. And before concluding, I want to thank personally all those people who are serving on the boards of the Association of Foreign Correspondents, that I will say their names, and I would like them to stand up just to meet them, because they are here, but they give, first of all, their reputation, their credibility, their names, their work, and they dedicate these things to our organization. I want to thank you, Nancy Prager Kimmel, our chairwoman. Please stand up. Suzanne Modares, our Vice President. Clarissa McNair, our Deputy Vice President. Alan Jude Riland, our General Secretary. Manoj Rizal from Nepal, our Treasurer. Laura Haim, who made the honor to us to be here today from DC. Laura, please. Betul Yuruk from Turkey, and we are neighbors. Where is Betul?
I think she left.
Okay, she left, but it's fine. She had another commitment. Betul Yuruk works for Anatolia Agency based on the United Nations. People working from the United Nations, covering the United Nations, are extremely busy. And Suzanne Modares, Valeria Robecco knows that. Serwin, the former president of the United Nations Correspondents Association, who is here today, and thank you, she knows that very well. Momoe Ban from Nikkei. Bobby Taluktar, who is not here today. Alan Teknon from Africa. Thank you, Alan. Alexander Hassanin, who is also covering the United Nations for Japanese newspapers. Thank you, Alexander. Elena Lenza, who is not here tonight, unfortunately, she's from Portugal. Jane Issei, our member of our educational board of directors. Jane, come please, of course. We have to have you here. Helen Whitney, who worked very hard also to review all these applications, and I was telling them, please give me the 10 names so you can select the 5 first names, and they reviewed all these applications. And not only that, Marilyn Haft, Lina Tabori, please come here, contacted all these universities in order to spread the word about our applications, because the real challenge here, for those who are not aware, and also for our supporters and sponsors and donors, is how to make people aware that we provide scholarships. And Thomas Barat from Hungary. Thank you, Thomas. who has written 17 books in Hungary, and he has been a distinguished professor of journalism and communications. Monique Tapi, unfortunately, she didn't make it tonight. She was not able. I want to thank you also, our advisors. Chris Loder, thank you for being with us. Maïv Duvali from Goldman Sachs. Maïv. Thank you. Amelia Augustus, who has been one of the founders and very prominent supporters of the Night Budget Fellowship Program of Columbia Journalism School. And she, during her career, she fought really hard to make women, to bring women in the epicenter of decision making and of public affairs. And I also want to thank you, Robert Klauser, Darius Grant, and all of our advisors who are not here tonight. Cecil McCarthy, of course, because without her, we wouldn't be here tonight. And really, thank you. Thank you very much for having appointed me and for having trusted me on serving as president of the Association of Foreign Correspondents. Thank you. And Dawn Kissy also. She just came. Please join our, please.
All right. Thank you, Thanos. We'll now hear from the editor-in-chief of Yahoo News, Daniel Klaidman. From 2006 to 2011, Daniel was Newsweek's managing editor, and before that, he served as the magazine's Washington bureau chief, Middle East correspondent, and as an investigative reporter. He's also the author of Kill or Capture: The War on Terror and the Soul of the Obama Presidency. Please join me in welcoming Daniel Klaidman.
Thank you so much. It is an honor to be here to support such an important cause, the continued strength and vitality of a free and independent press around the world. Let me start by congratulating the awardees. Man, they are impressive. I kept thinking that, it gives you hope that despite the challenges and the enormous hardship that journalists face around the world, that this generation of journalists can and will prevail. And I kept thinking, maybe I get the chance to work with some of them. They are really good. Let me also congratulate the board, this very impressive board of the Foreign Correspondents Association, and thank them for all the important work they do. And I want to recognize the foreign correspondents in this room and everywhere who day in and day out fulfill the crucial mission of informing the public and helping us understand the world a little better, often at great sacrifice. We only have to say the name Jamal Khashoggi to highlight the extraordinary dangers facing journalists today and the impunity with which governments around the world treat those seeking to bring the truth to light. As a young foreign correspondent in the late 90s and early aughts, I witnessed and covered the repression of journalists, mostly in the Middle East. For me, these were topics that went hand in glove with stories about corruption, coups, and chronic human rights violations. They were exotic to me because they were not a regular part of the American experience. Throughout most of my career as a journalist, the United States government, with its principled support for free expression, was a beacon of hope for journalists around the world. But today, instead of spreading those foundational American values, instead of providing unwavering support for free expression and press freedom, we are exporting our government's own hostile attitudes toward the press. It is chilling to know that, as in the example of the New York Times' Declan Walsh, that the government does not have your back when you are doing such important constitutionally sanctioned work. Our president has even exported a vernacular of press vilification in phrases like fake news and enemies of the people the very words dictators now use to delegitimize journalists and justify crackdowns on their freedoms. At most journalism events I have attended, it was the journalists and their important work that we celebrated, and indeed we are doing that today. But we are also appropriately and importantly saluting a government official, because notwithstanding the tensions at the heart of the relationship between the press and the government, in a healthy, well-functioning democracy, we should ultimately be on the same team, a team that privileges justice over injustice, accountability over impunity, transparency over excessive secrecy, effective policy over waste, incompetence, and abuse, a team that shares a set of common values about the importance of building a just, decent, and more peaceful world. That is why I am especially pleased to honor my friend Jeh Johnson, who is a paragon of these values and of the vital role a free press plays in upholding them. And that is why I am honored to be here to present Jeh with the Foreign Correspondents Association Award for Lifetime Contributions for Public Service. Let me say a few words about Jeh's extraordinary career in public service and law. A graduate of Morehouse College and Columbia Law School, Secretary Johnson started his career as a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, right here in Manhattan. Later, he was appointed by President Clinton to be general counsel at the Air Force. From 2009 until 2012, he served as general counsel of the entire Defense Department. And after a brief return to private practice, President Obama tapped Jeh to be Secretary of Homeland Security, where his responsibilities included counterterrorism, cybersecurity, aviation security, and protecting the borders. I have to point out that President Trump is now going on his 5th DHS secretary. A couple of them have been actings. In 3 years, the math alone suggests that he may have no choice but to reach out to Secretary Johnson for a second tour of duty. Jay's shaking his head. I should also say that given the horrific press coverage his successors have received and Jay's glowing reviews, Jeh may be the first cabinet secretary who ends up on Mount Rushmore. The truth is, reporters like Jeh, and there are good reasons why. I met Jeh in 2009 at a furtive meeting at the Four Seasons Hotel in Washington, D.C. He was the top lawyer at the Defense Department. I was a Newsweek reporter and was working on a book about how President Obama was going to fight the war on terrorism. It was a daunting reporting project because I had to find people who would talk to me about sensitive national security policies like detention, interrogations, and the use of drones to kill terror suspects. It turned out to be one of the best relationships I have ever had with a government official. Not because he leaked sensitive secrets to me. As hard as I tried, Jeh was scrupulous about protecting classified information, but rather because he was honest and forthcoming about the excruciatingly hard decisions he and his colleagues had to make on almost a daily basis, life and death decisions that required the careful balancing of security and liberty, morality and law. And because Jeh invited, didn't just tolerate, but invited tough questions from the media. It was extraordinary that officials in such sensitive positions at the Pentagon, at our intelligence agencies, at the State Department, in the White House, were willing to invite a reporter into the inner sanctum of national security decision-making. What I believe Jeh understood better than most was that by allowing the press to report on such difficult, consequential policies in a tough but fair-minded way, the government over time would arrive at better decisions, that policies would rest on a firm foundation of trustworthy intelligence, law, and prudent judgments. For the record, the Trump White House has not given a public press briefing since March 9th, almost 8 months. Jeh understood that when the press asks tough questions, challenges assumptions and settled narratives, exposes mistakes and stirs debate, government is at its most effective. In many countries around the world today, we see the opposite taking place. Authoritarian governments have been able to co-opt the press, purging real journalists fining them, ginning up bogus lawsuits against them, jailing them, even killing them, while turning others into thinly disguised propagandists who do the government's bidding at the expense of the people. The consequences are dire when an adversarial press is always derided as fake news, delegitimized, turned into the government's amen corner. As Marty Barron of the Washington Post had said so simply and eloquently, when the facts go missing, ignored, twisted, or trampled on, the world becomes an especially dangerous place. The United States was always a model for the world when it came to free expression and advocating for a vigorous independent press. American presidents spoke up for these principles when they traveled overseas. Their press secretaries poignantly fought for the rights of American reporters and their foreign counterparts to ask questions at press conferences, even of dictators who would otherwise put them in jail. I see Jeh Johnson in that noble American tradition. I see Jeh Johnson in that tradition of American public servants who take to heart the press's vital role in our democracy and without whom it will be harder and harder to fulfill our mission. So Jeh, come on up. Come down here.
I guess it's my turn. Good evening, everyone. Let me begin by thanking my friend Dan Klaidman for that very generous introduction. When I was asked who would I like to present this award to me, I wanted to find a journalist here in New York, and most of my journalist friends are in Washington, but it turns out that Dan is probably the journalist who knows me best, who has covered my public service from my days at the Department of Defense for 10 years now. I want to thank the Association of Foreign Correspondents for this very flattering award and recognition. I want to congratulate the scholarship recipients who are here tonight. I wish you great luck and success in your careers as reporters, journalists, correspondents. I had, as Dan referred, a healthy, good relationship with the press in my time in public office. It was healthy but not always pleasant, which is how it should be. There were times when things were tense. There were times when, in my humble opinion, you got it wrong. There were times when the New York Times editorial page went overboard, and I would call to scream at Andrew Rosenthal, the editor. But in the end, looking back on it, I want to apply a quote from Dan's book, Killer Capture, out of Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is all about the very contentious relationship that I, as the General Counsel of the Department of Defense, had with Harold Koh, the legal advisor to the State Department. And looking back on it, I'm convinced President Obama put the two of us in our respective roles knowing that we would have a contentious relationship. But in the end, it was a good thing. Just like the relationship that public servants ought to have with journalists, with correspondents. And Dan used a phrase that described my relationship with Harold that I will use tonight in my relationship with the press. A healthy dialectic that led to smarter and better justified policies. I believe that now, and I sort of believed that then. I'm in private life again. I'm very much enjoying my private life as a corporate lawyer at the law firm of Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison here in Manhattan. You may see me occasionally on television as a pundit, as an interviewee. I believe in working both sides of the street. I'm on MSNBC and I'm on Fox. Literally both sides of the street. You have no idea. You have no idea the mental agility required from appearing on Morning Joe and then going across the street to Fox and Friends. It's not many people do it. What I found is the more often I'm on TV, the more I get recognized. More indeed than when I was in public office and my face was in every airport in the United States. And that video, if you see something, say something, play it endlessly. But I actually get recognized more depending upon how often you see me in the news giving an interview. And I have a couple of favorites since I left public office. Occasionally somebody, and it usually revolves around trains. For some reason it's trains. So in Penn Station, somebody will come up to me, "Hey, ain't you that guy on TV? You that guy on TV. I saw you with Rachel Maddow." Right. "Yeah, you the guy on MSNBC. You that MSNBC man. Or weren't you Secretary of Agriculture?" Somebody twice. Bay Street Station, Montclair, New Jersey, where I live. New Haven Railroad Station, Metro North. Somebody came up to me and said, "Has anybody ever told you look just like Jeh Johnson?" Then there's my all-time favorite. My all-time favorite. Maybe one or two have heard me tell this story once before. It was the day after I testified before the House Intelligence Committee on Russian interference in our election. June 2017. I was called back to Washington to testify. I must have been on every newscast that night because the next day I was riding home to New Jersey on the Acela, the train, and everybody was recognizing me. The guy next to me, the two guys across the aisle from me, the two ladies on the other end of the Acela car with the T-shirts that said, "Not my president," recognized me. And I was in the cafe car of the Acela, and I was in a long line waiting for my usual cheese and crackers plate. And I was wearing the very same cufflinks that Ray is wearing tonight. Ray, just do this. Just raise your arms. Let everybody see your cufflinks. Those are really nice cufflinks. They come from the White House. They're presidential cufflinks. They're gold and black with the seal on them. They're really nice. And I was wearing an identical set of cufflinks like that in a white shirt and a tie. I was in my shirt sleeves. I was in the line, and there was a lady in the line, two in front of me. And she looked at me, and she did like that. And she recognized me. I could see that flash of recognition. And then she got out her iPhone, and she starts queuing it up. She's queuing it up to the camera function. So I know, here it comes. And she approached me, and she flattered me like I've never been flattered before. She said, "Sir," I'll never forget this, "Sir, I'm from the United Kingdom, and my son back in the United Kingdom really admires you in much the terms that Dan described. He really admires you, and he respected all the wonderful things that you did in office. And it would mean so much to me if I could have a selfie with you to present to my son when I got back to the United Kingdom." And I said, "Ma'am, how could I possibly say no? Of course you can have a selfie with me." So we took the picture, and then she turned around and she looked at me and she said, "Thank you, Mr. President." So there goes. And that was that burst my balloon. So now, I do have something I want to say of a serious nature to this collection of very distinguished foreign correspondents. And I am mindful that I am in a room full of reporters. So as far as I'm concerned, everything I'm about to tell you can be on the record. You can write it down, you can get out your phone, you can type it, whatever you'd like. You can quote me. Many of you, I am quite sure, are asking what has happened to our democracy here in America. What has happened to the United States' traditional role as a beacon and a leader for freedom of religion, for freedom of speech, for freedom to travel, freedom to associate? What has happened to the country that is a nation of immigrants, that now vilifies many immigrants, particularly on our southern border? How is it that we appear to have forsaken the Statue of Liberty? To be blunt, how can the same country, in the space of just 8 years, elect Barack Obama and Donald Trump? What has happened to, why did we forsake the Paris Accords on climate change? Why have we walked away from the JCPOA? I want you to know that many of us in this country ask the same question. How is it that the President of the United States could brand the members of your profession the enemy of the people? Well, let me say this. Donald Trump is, to be frank, not a cause, but a symptom. For years now, we have seen a decline in the trust that Americans have in their political leaders. It did not start with Donald Trump. For too long, our democracy failed to address our people, to the point where many, many Americans, perhaps most Americans, believe that their government does not work for them anymore, that their government does not serve their needs. And indeed, in many respects, that is true. In many respects, the majority will is thwarted by a powerful and vocal minority that has its way with politicians in Washington. On the other hand, I and many others are, as some others here are, an optimist. I believe in the pendulum theory of American politics. I believe that Americans try something and then within the space of 4 or 8 years want something radically different. And I will tell you that there are no two individuals more different than Barack Obama and Donald Trump. By the way, Dan, you got it wrong. He's not looking for his 5th Secretary of Homeland Security. He's looking for his 6th Secretary of Homeland Security. I'll give you a little bit of trivia. On January 20, 2017, I was the designated survivor, the person who had to stay behind in the cabinet and serve in the event of disaster in the presidential line of succession in the undisclosed location until my successor was appointed and confirmed by the Senate. So for 7 hours and 32 minutes, I was Donald Trump's, not only his first cabinet officer, but the entirety of his cabinet, and therefore the first person to resign from Donald Trump's cabinet. It always gets, no matter the audience, it always gets a great applause. But I'm an optimist, and I believe that the pendulum will swing back. I also believe that there is a great equilibrium about this country and our values that is not lost. We may have temporarily lost our way, but that great equilibrium is not lost in this country, and I want to assure all of you of that. Perhaps the best moment I had in the Obama administration is one that even Dan Clayman doesn't know about, which I'm going to tell you about right now. It was fall of 2014, 5 years ago. 5 years ago, perhaps this month. And as some of you may remember, we were in the throes of a lot of public anxiety about the Ebola virus here in this country. A handful of cases had made it into the country, and there was a lot of panic. There was panic in Dallas, Texas, and elsewhere, because a handful of people infected with the Ebola virus had unwittingly made it into our country. For a while, every passenger who got sick on a commercial aircraft, in the restroom of a commercial aircraft bound for the United States, became a matter personally for the Secretary of Homeland Security, even if they weren't coming from the continent of Africa. And in the midst of this great concern and this great anxiety here in this country about the Ebola virus emanating from West Africa, we and I, as Secretary of Homeland Security, considered suspending visas, the issuance of visas from those 3 West African countries where the virus was emanating from. When you're Secretary of Homeland Security, you want to buy down all risk to the homeland and to the people. You want to buy down risk. That's your job. And I considered suspending visas from those 3 countries in order to buy down the risk that another person would enter this country without our knowing it, infected by the Ebola virus. And then 2 things happened. One, I looked at the list of countries that had suspended travel from those 3 African countries, and the countries that had not suspended travel from those 3 African countries. And it occurred to me, the United States of America does not belong on the first list. We belong on the second list. And a whole lot of other countries on the second list are looking to us to see what we do. And if we go to the first list, they're going to go to the first list. And second, I heard from our ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power. And Samantha had a point of view that I had not carefully considered, which is that if we suspend travel from these countries, a whole lot of other countries are going to do the same thing. And we will isolate, the world community will isolate these countries at a time when they need us most. And we had that discussion in the National Security Council, and we and I ultimately concluded we should not suspend travel. We found a way to funnel all travel from those 3 countries to just 5 airports in the US where they received heightened health screening. And after that point, not a single person got into this country without our knowledge who was infected by the Ebola virus. The United States led. We dispatched our military and our health community, as did a whole lot of other countries, to those 3 African countries, and stamped out the virus without suspending travel. And that's the United States I know, and I hope that that's the United States that all of you know and will know in the future. You know, it's okay. I tell audiences it's okay to be America first. It's okay to be Turkey first if you're Turkish. It's okay if you're Greek to be Greek first. But it's not America only, and it's not one country only. We are all, in addition to being proud citizens of our own land and our own country, inhabitants of an increasingly smaller but interconnected planet that we must all live up to, and the landlord is watching. Thank you very much.
Before you go for the drink, thank you, Secretary Johnson, for your presence, your remarks here. It is a great honor for us to have you here. I want to apologize to Anjali Sharma, who is a member of our educational board. Please come here. Anjali, I want to thank her. And I also want to call for 1-2 minutes remarks from Laura Haim, who made all this trip here to be with us. And she has some thoughts to share, because she's one of the most exceptional foreign correspondents from Europe here in the United States. Please, Laura, join us.
Thank you very much. I think I wanted to speak with the heart of a foreign correspondent. It's not easy to come to the United States and be a foreign correspondent. We have strong accents. We're thinking outside the box most of the times. We're working alone. We do not have the resources of the American medias, but we're passionate. We're passionate about what we're doing. We're passionate about showing to a global audience America. We're passionate to do real news. We're passionate to show real things. And we're passionate to all the times convince our editors that we have to do those news in America. To create an association, to create the Association of Foreign Correspondents, is going to help us to advance our cause. It's going to help us to convince people with resources to help us to do this important work. And I just wanted to thank very much from the bottom of my heart this extraordinary gentleman for doing that and helping us. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much to everyone for coming out tonight. It couldn't be possible without you. Congratulations to our scholarship recipients and our honorees. Going forward, it's up to all of us to remind the public of the personal risks journalists face each and every day to seek the truth so that we can be an engaged and informed citizenry. Our very democracy depends on it. So on that note, we have a beautiful reception for you upstairs. Let's continue the conversation there, and thank you again for coming out tonight.